All right, I am sorry about the late start. I was just kind of strumming through my morning and then I realized, oh crap, I got to teach today. And so that's the problem with not having taught for on Tuesdays and Thursdays for several years is that I was a little bit behind. So real quick note about what's going to happen today. We're going to have our FIFA discussion or FIFA, depending on how you pronounce it. I'm going to say FIFA because in English, the I is a long sound. So, but anyway. And then we're going to have our quiz. Then we're going to debrief on the case. I am going to record two separate videos. I'm going to record this one. It'd be public on YouTube. The other one, I'm going to put a link on Brightspace. That's mostly because I don't want this to be public. And so people who are working on Tallahassee bean counters at another institution can say, oh, look, all the solutions. That's answered. By the way, I do want to make a note of that. So it does not appear, based on my review of the answers, that anybody found some solutions online, but I will say that there's a likelihood for the cases that we're going to be working on that you could find solutions online. And you may be saying, oh, it's a shortcut. Thanks for telling us, Dr. Barnes. I'm not telling you that so you can shortcut this. I'm telling you that simply because it really defeats the purpose of the activity if you go in to find the solutions online, use that as a shortcut. And more importantly, if you do that and then I discover that's the case, it's going to be a bad time for everyone involved because you will get hit with an academic misconduct charge, which will probably be problematic given that many of you are graduating this semester. I will have to do additional paperwork, which is the bigger tragedy. Okay. I hate paperwork. I hate paperwork. So please do not do that. Again, the goal here is not so much that you get everything right. The goal is that you think about this, and we're going to talk about some things that you all did well, and some things that you can think about for the next series of cases that you should improve on. I will tell you just as a spoiler that I think everybody did a reasonably good job. There were definitely some things missed, but I expected that because it was the first application of this. We'll talk more about that shortly. So let's talk about FIFA. So the real football, okay, yeah, everybody's like, oh, football's American, Dr. Barnes says, no, football is a sport that's played with your feet, believe it or not. And so, the Federation Internationale de Football Association, FIFA. And so some of you may be familiar with this, especially if you follow the World Cup, is that there was a big kind of controversy regarding the bidding processes. And they allude to it in the video about how the bidding process works. But the bidding was taking place around 2010. So, 16 years ago. So this is a long period of controversy, but it was the idea is that they're going to be assigning the World Cup at the same time for both 2018 and 2022. And there's some controversy given the people or the entities, the countries that actually received that. All right. So for 2018, does anybody remember or acknowledge or catch where the World Cup was held? It was Russia. Yeah, it was in Russia, which was kind of largely viewed as an authoritarian regime. And then there was this was when Oceania was up for the bid, kind of the different continent. Andrew was actually doing a good summary of the of this earlier before class. So Oceania had it up, and so you think Oceania, it's probably Australia, that region. It was Qatar, which to my knowledge is a Middle Eastern country, but apparently they fall within the Oceania district. So this is a little bit about the bidding process that was going on for that period of time and how there was actually some controversy involved. So the start of the video is very, very vague. It's very vague as to what's going on there because you hear, all right, we need to have bid for like $85 million. And it's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. What are you bidding on? Like you're basically saying that you need $85 million to get a World Cup bid. And so if you do a little bit of research on this, you say that what is that amount of money? Because she actually says that we don't need $85 million. The powers that be said, yeah, we're going to use, I think what was the number? They said 48 million was their eventual bid. But what is that money used for? And so the technical definition is these are infrastructure projects that are supposed to be used to actually improve the overall well-being of FIFA and international football abroad. All right. What is the actual explanation for this? It's bribery. Okay, it is full out bribery that's going on there. This is, and she alludes to it. Says this is basically money laundering, and I don't think there's any basic about it. It is money laundering. It's basically what's going there. Well, I said basically again. Is effectively what's going on there. So she kind of was in the pits and she knew what was happening. And then she turns around and says, all right, I'm going to whistleblow because this is not going well. She lost her job. That's probably one big impetus of whistleblowing. But yeah, it is a kind of a sad, sorry situation. So let's go ahead and get into the details here. So what were the key parties? And I know that you can probably, as key parties, you probably have FIFA listed as a key party, but specifically what groups within FIFA would we say is probably the key parties with respect to the fraud?
The FFA, all,
Yeah, the Football Federation, they alluded to that, but who was actually receiving the benefit from the fraud? Fraud? I mean, you say FIFA, but what individuals within FIFA?
is the actual voting individual?
Yeah, so the voting individuals they call the executive committee. Okay, the executive committee, which yeah, so I'm going to refer to them as kind of the EC, the executive committee, which there are several board members. I think there's 15 board members of the 15 voting members of the executive committee within FIFA. They mentioned one of them by name, Sepp Blatter, which if you're not familiar with Sepp Blatter, he's no longer the head of FIFA, but he was at that time. You want to talk about a notorious individual, go look at some detail about Sepp Blatter. That's beyond the scope of this particular discussion, but Sepp Blatter was, it seemed like if he could stir controversy up, he found a way to do it. It was just amazing. And so any other parties that we would identify as kind of key parties involved here? I think the host countries, the ones that were trying to serve as host countries, are identified there. The consultants, that's a good identification as well, because the consultants were very, very heavily there. Because that was alluded to in the discussion, saying you really could not compete against other host countries unless you hired an expensive consultant. And so the consultant that was identified in this case, they identified what was an individual's name? I've got it in my notes. Peter Hargitay, yeah, Peter Hargitay, that's what it is. I know it's in my notes somewhere, but I've got a lot of notes. So yeah, okay. Yeah, so the consultants. There was another one that was alluded to. I don't think it was a consultant, but it was one of the executive committee members that was representing Oceania, and so that was Reynald Tamari, who's a former football player. I should probably say soccer. We're in the United States. Former soccer player, and there was actually a very interesting note there. So what was a little bit later on, it talks about how Reynald Tamari was paid $4 million by the U.S. to represent U.S. interests in the U.S. market, which I don't know how the U.S. market plays into this because it was supposed to be an Oceania market, but apparently there was an argument that the U.S. time zone was more prevalent for media. But paid $4 million. That was on top of the $4 million that he was already paid by Australia to say, you're representing Australia. So this guy's just kind of like raking in cash. Says, okay, who's got more money for me? More money. The next bid, okay, 4.5 million. I'll take your bid. Yeah, I was like saying, man, just good to be the king, I guess. Good to be the king. So yeah, we can identify several key parties. I'm sure there's a much broader array there, but I think that's a pretty good summary. As far as the financial impact of the fraud, I mean, this is a bribery and corruption case, but there's a lot that we can unpack here. And there's some things I want to talk about that are not even necessarily financial impacts, but definitely impacts we should consider. So let's stick with the financial impact for now. All right. So there's the bid from Australia, which depending on the figure that you use is going to be 48 to 50, 85 million. All right. And remember, the $85 million was likened to money laundering. And the idea being is that they're just effectively bribing individuals to get the business, get the position of the host country. And then there was some additional cost on top of that. So we alluded to the consultants. The consultants were not free. They actually had to receive payment for that. And favors to the executive committee members. Now, there were some notes on the executive committee members, the voting members, and their payments off. If you did a little bit of digging, you found that several executive committee members got paid for their votes, which is kind of why Qatar ended up getting it. Qatar's got a lot of money because of oil interest, but there's some questions about whether Qatar was actually a good place to hold the World Cup. By the way, the answer is no. It was not a good place to hold the World Cup. But yeah, they got paid, and there's some of the reports saying that they didn't have a specific number, but I think they said at least three that they knew of got $1 million for each for their bids. So yeah, that's kind of one of those things. That's the brass ring, I think, what you're trying to get to is get on the executive committee for FIFA, people start throwing money at you. But I think that's true for pretty much all kind of organized sports nowadays, if that's the case. And then cost to consultants, the favors of the FIFA executive committee members. And then there's infrastructure development cost, which That would be something that we'd want to note. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all of this is that we're going to compare this in moments. Okay, so these are all things that are costs ahead of time that Australia would have to pay. So, what would be kind of a good scale for infrastructure development costs? And the answer is, as is in all cases with my classes, it depends. And what it depends is we don't have a good answer on what it depends upon. But so they did some comparisons and they said that if you look at previous host countries that hosted the World Cup, they had to put billions of dollars into infrastructure development. Now, when South Africa did it, they said they put $3 billion of development into that, which you're like saying, $3 billion, that's ridiculous, Dr. Barnes. It's like, that's nothing. All right. Qatar put 220 billion of infrastructure development cost into the World Cup hosting. So somewhere in that range, between 3 billion and 220 billion, there's a lot of wiggle room. Okay. There's a lot of wiggle room there. Now, I would probably say a safe bet if Australia had hosted it, it would be $5 billion. So the cost is the bribery cost, the cost of the consultants, and then the infrastructure development cost. What is the benefit that Australia would get if they had gotten to host the World Cup?
Host the sport in their own country.
Yeah, host the sport in their own country. There have been big, massive influx for about a month of individuals visiting and media coverage that would have been paid to Australia. So they would have had a massive influx for a very short period of time, which presumably they would have recouped all those costs and more. Now, I question whether or not Qatar actually made their cost back because $220 billion, that just seems like a losing effort. I think that was more of a prestige thing. It's like we've got so much money, we don't care how much money we're going to make. We just want the World Cup here. Now, speaking of Qatar, let's talk about them, okay? Let's talk about them. So this is a little bit outside of scope because I only asked you for financial impact, but could we identify other impacts associated with Qatar hosting the World Cup? You betcha, you betcha. Okay, so what do we know about some of the Middle Eastern countries and kind of their reputation for I guess just human rights and kind of due diligence? I'm not trying to pick on Middle Eastern countries in specific, but I am trying to pick on Qatar specifically, okay? So what do we know about Qatar? Did anybody do any research or find out any details? Well, fortunately, I did. Okay, so yes, yes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and refer to one of my favorite resources. You all know this. You all know, love it. I'm going to do last week tonight. Okay, because I like talking about it.
Qatar recruited hundreds of thousands of workers, mainly from India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, through agencies in their home countries. Just to secure a job, migrants had little choice but to pay recruitment fees of up to $4,000 before they left the country. And once they got to Qatar, they were already in debt and trapped in a system known in the Middle East as kafala.
All right, so I'm going to stop it there because I don't want this video to be flagged by YouTube as borrowing content. I can do 30 seconds, but that's it. So what the announcer is about to say the kafala system is effectively modern day slavery. All right. And if you go in and watch that video a little bit more, basically they were living in conditions that were just squalor. Like they're talking about 600 people living in one facility that has like 2 toilets and the toilets don't work. Okay. They were taking showers out of the toilets because they didn't have running water. And so yeah, it was disgusting and awful. But let's move on beyond that. Okay. So migrant workers working in there, they're working in 52 degrees Celsius heat. Is that hot? Okay, so we're like, I don't know, Dr. Barnes. I'm an American. I only know Fahrenheit scale. Okay, 52 degrees Celsius. Let's do some math. What does that translate to in 50 degrees Celsius? What does that translate into Fahrenheit? 125 degrees, 125 degrees. Now, keep a note here that one of the things they did with the Qatar World Cup is they actually transitioned it to November because they were worried about the athletes being in such conditions that they could not operate optimally. So, like, it's too hot in the summer in Qatar, so we can't have our premier athletes working there. It's okay if we bring micro workers in there and work in 125-degree heat. Okay. So there were some casualties, quite a few. Now, hundreds of thousands, what would be the scale of that? Now, there's not a precise figure. If you ask the Qatar government, they said only a handful of workers. They said it was like in the dozens of figures, and a lot of those were pre-existing conditions. If they actually catch the scale of migrant workers that had casualties during that time period that the infrastructure was being developed, it was around 6,500 migrant workers. Now, not all of those are attributable to the World Cup infrastructure. That's still a ridiculous number. Still a ridiculous number to have to note. And then we can also talk about human rights issues just at a general level. What do we know about Qatar and kind of their view of human rights and their view of kind of modern culture views? So how do they feel about, let's just say, marginalized community, women? Okay. Yeah, the women don't have rights in Qatar. Okay. They're basically considered to be a secondary community. What about minorities, people who are not Qatar nationals? Yeah, they're not treated with the same equivalency. Oh, here's an interesting. What about marginalized communities, like people who are not people who I don't want to kind of pigeonhole one. It's like, so the gay community be an interesting one because that was actually talked about in the video. Is that something that's enlightened in Qatar? People that are like, no, no, like, yeah, that was one thing that's considered to be like a penalty of death type sin. Okay, if you live in Qatar. So yeah, there are people who kind of flee the country because of that. So not a particularly good area. Now, again, outside the scope of this, I'm not going to ask you a quiz question, but I do think it's important to understand that the level of fraud that we're going here, the impact of the fraud extends well beyond the financial impact of paying some executive committee members some money so Qatar could host the World Cup. There were people who lost their lives literally because of this exchange. So if we're talking about an impact, I think we have to expand it and say we can't just think about dollars and cents here. We have to think about human lives in this particular situation, which I know that's pretty heavy and it's probably not something you're going to encounter if you ever do a forensic investigation. But from the financial impact perspective, it's not limited to that, and that's something important. All right. With respect to fraud risk factors, so there's some ones that are, I think, pretty easy to identify. Let's talk about the easiest one, okay? Pressure. What would be the most immense pressure that you think would be associated with this particular situation? Yeah, get into bed. So, and what do we know about these bids? Are they for just a little bit of money? Is it something like this is kind of life-changing money we're talking about here? Like being paid, having a consultant being paid millions of dollars. I'm open to retire. At least I have $1 million in my 401k, and I'm just kind of like, if I could on FIFA, I could get that done right now. It's like, yeah, it's like corruption. Sign me up. I'm sorry, I'm just joking. Okay, that would never ever happen. I would never be corrupt in that. If I was going to be corrupt, it wouldn't be something where people's lives on the line. It would be something else, like where a student gets their grade partially inflated. Just letting you know, okay? Just letting you know. All right. So yeah, if we're talking about that, so we talked about a few of those already. There's a lot of money being passed around, millions of dollars for this, which is intuitively sensible because the upside of this is going to be millions and millions of dollars. Now, I think that again, like I said, this is kind of paradoxical when we talk about Qatar because I do not think that there was any way that they recouped all of their money. I think that was a prestige thing. It's like saying Qatar is so well known. They did have kind of an interesting association they talked about in the video with kind of the airline system that had just started up back in 2007, Qatar Airlines, that was trying to become a major player. So if Qatar Airlines was kind of doing most of the travel for the host country, then they did see some financial benefit, and that could be a long-term benefit that they could actually see. It would be extend beyond the World Cup. They say we had a pleasant experience on Qatar Airlines. Now we can do this longer term. So there may have actually been, even though it was fraudulent, completely totally fraudulent, there may have been some savvy economic planning on the in the hands of those horrible people. So yeah, and I don't say that. I know that I don't say that lightly, but some of the people that were involved there were not very pleasant people. Um, let's talk about one that's a little bit less obvious, but I think that we need to discuss. What is the opportunity for fraud that exists here? So what is the thing that stops fraud in most situations? I mean, yeah, I know you're going to say controls, okay, but at a more general level, what are we talking about when we talk about controls? Supervision, oversight, some sort of mechanism, that's the best word I have for it, that ensures that people who are put in a position of stress and people who are put in a position of pressure will act in the right capacity, right, act in the most manner with most integrity, rather than something that's self-serving. Now, the FIFA Executive Committee, did they have any supervision or any oversight over their operations whatsoever? They're basically an autonomous, independent body that has got all of this money and all of this power. And so it makes perfect sense when we talk about the amount of money involved and the pressures that are put onto them. They're going to make very skewed decisions. And this was a skewed decision. It's definitely a skewed decision that had massive consequences. So if we're talking about opportunity, this is one where we probably should say, well, FIFA, if you're going to be in this role, then you need to have some sort of group that's going to be overseeing the decisions of the executive committee members. Because I'm just looking at some of the news clippings and seeing how the voting went. I'm just like, these people have got to be just completely and totally, corrupted. corrupt, whatever, corrupted or corrupt, however you want to determine it. They've got to be completely corrupt in their actions because there's no way a rational human being would behave in this manner. Speaking of rational, what do we have for rationalization? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, if you throw enough money at something, anybody can rationalize anything. I think the rationalization threshold was very, very low. You know, we like to say that we operate ethically as human beings, and I think that everyone in this room is generally an ethical human being. But I'm going to tell you, if somebody came at you with enough money, you would behave unethically. It would not. You would say, I'm completely ethical. There are some things that I would never do, no matter the amount of money. Somebody gives you enough money, you're going to do it. Okay, you're going to do it, and that's. And you say that was this enough money? Well, we're talking millions of dollars, which again is literally life-changing money for many individuals. We're talking about this just kind of being bandied around for just without too much difficulty and too much commitment, then certainly that's the case. So there's definitely a lot of fallout for this. And I think that that's one of the primary lessons we can learn from this case. If we're talking about what are the primary lessons, if you pay people enough money, they will ignore just atrocious behavior. These are complete and total atrocities. Again, outside of the scope, but I can't stress this enough. If we're talking about FIFA corruption, this was kind of a video where if you watched by the way, I watched it on 2x speed because it was like 38 minutes. Yeah, there's no way. But 19 minutes was actually pretty good. She talked in a nice, clear, concise manner, which 2x speed was perfect. Anybody else watch it on 2x speed? Yeah, I knew some hands were going to go up. Yeah. Yeah. There's some things you don't want to watch on two times speed, like me lecturing. That's just a bad idea. All right. But there's some things that you can watch on 2x speed and still get the gist of it. And so, yeah. But the video itself was a little bit chill, but I think that that underlines an important issue that we do have to talk about. There's something more important that we have to talk about here, though. And if we're talking about money being associated with atrocities, is there something else that we need to be aware of? And this is going to be general for anybody who's a sports fan, which I know there's a lot of them in this room. Okay. But what do we know about the association between sports and larger social issues? A lot of problems with them. Okay. We're actually going to talk about in 3 weeks. I think we're going to be talking about the NCAA betting scandal. Has anybody been following that? Yeah, that one's a big one too. Okay. It's actually pretty recent as well. We're going to be talking about the NCAA betting scandal. So people were saying, yeah, you shouldn't do that. It's just bad idea. It's bad form. But, when it comes to sports, people do not behave rationally either. All right. Now, for the NCAA, that's a limited group of individuals. And I know you're saying, oh, what are you talking about? It's March Madness. It's big. Well, how many people pay attention to the NCAA outside of the United States? How many people pay attention to the NFL outside the United States? We don't think we're the Super Bowl, okay? Yeah, we're going to be the world champion. It's like, yeah, nobody else plays football outside the United States. It's very limited. It's a big deal. Don't get me wrong, but it's small. Compare that to soccer, the World Cup, okay? How big is the World Cup relative to these other sports, the NCAA and the NFL? It's massive, huge, just like scales bigger, scales larger, all right? So that's going to present a lot of problems for us because we know that people are just going to behave differently when they know it. So that first time the whistle blows and the first kick happens in soccer, what are people going to think about these atrocities? What are they going to think about Qatar's behavior? What are they going to think about corruption and fraud? They're going to ignore it and they're going to say, go England or go France or whatever team you're rooting for. Not the United States. They're never going to win it. But yeah. So, go for whatever team you're rooting for. You're just going to say, the World Cup is here. I don't care what else happened to get here. We got there. And that is a terrible mindset to have. We tend to think about things after the fact and not when they're happening. And we can't afford to take that mindset if we ever want to have progress in this area. So I kind of expostulated on my thoughts, but what do you all think about this? What were some takeaways you had for this? Clayton.
There was so much going on in this fraud that it was like hard to keep track of like what would become important for like the whistleblowing in the case. Because I was like, I was watching the video and taking notes as I was doing it, and I'm like, it would mention things, and I'm like, okay, this is definitely a puzzle piece, but I don't know if this is like a direct contributor to the whistleblowing itself. Then.
Yeah, and the problem is that there were so many working pieces. This organization and this activity is so massive that there's no way a single fraud investigation is ever going to solve the problem. Like this one whistleblowing issue that we talked about in this particular case, that's a small piece of the puzzle. And it's may have solved some small problems, but it's not going to solve the larger problem, which is it's a symptom of a larger issue. And so if we cure a symptom, are we curing the sickness? no, the sickness is still there. And I'm sorry that anecdote, I know it's overused, but I think it's an important one to use. What other ones do we have?
And I just wanted to ask about, I'm kind of confused about it. Was there a reason they were explicitly not told to mention either Vargatai and the other guy that were two consultants they should never speak about? Because I kind of missed that in the video. I like the reasoning why.
I think it was more for like media publicity, and the same thing happens if they can't, if the names were dropped, and then there's going to be some sort of blame pointed at them. Says, yeah, these are the ones who are responsible for these kind of bad actors or being bad actors and promoting bad behavior. Anything else? What do you got, Jared?
I thought one of the big lessons was that like whistleblower protections are essential to uncover this misconduct.
Yeah, if you think about it, there wasn't really a protection here because she kind of turned whistleblower after the fact, and kudos to her, because if I was in that situation and I just gotten shafted as badly as she did, I'd be kind of like, I'm done with this. Okay, like if I went state's evidence against Dr. Caden, it'd have to be while I'm still here at Truman. If she finally said, okay, you're fired, Dr. Barnes, which I couldn't blame her if she said that. But if she said you're fired, Dr. Barnes, I wouldn't after the fact seek retribution. I'd just be kind of like, yeah, I'm tired of stressing out about this whole thing. I'm just going to go live in a shack in the woods somewhere and grow tomatoes or something like that. Yeah. I think the whistleblower protections are really, really important for people to act before the fact and not after the fact if we're going to do what's the right thing. And so it's obviously much bigger issue and much more scaled in corporate America. Speaking of that, we're talking about whistleblowers. Do we think that we have a good infrastructure for whistleblowing today if we're talking about corporate environments worldwide or United States? In theory, yes. In theory, we do have a whistleblower function and people take it more seriously. But based on the behavior and the actions we've seen, that the theory and the reality do not align. They do not hold up. It seems like whistleblowers are still kind of shoved to the side because people don't want to acknowledge what the raw truth is in the situation. If it's something unpleasant, it's going to ruin something like our World Cup, then people are going to say, well, I'm just going to ignore it and hope it goes away. And in this case, it kind of largely did. It kind of got away. Like we had a World Cup in Qatar and everybody was saying, what a success. Won because I don't remember what team won. Was it France? No, I don't remember.
22?
What's that? 22.
Argentina.
Okay. So obviously one of the teams was a good team. Yeah. One of the countries was a good team. Yeah. All right. So you notice never United States. Okay. I'm going to hold to that until the point where we start. I mean, this is again outside of scope, but that actually makes sense. We got so many different sporting interests here in the United States. How many people are going to play soccer and says, you know what? I'd like to make thousands of dollars playing a soccer and ignore the millions of dollars I can make playing actual legitimized expensive sports. Like the amount of money that soccer players make in the United States is so much less than what they make worldwide. Okay. Cristiano Ronaldo basically is just kind of like saying, oh, I woke up this morning and made another $1 million. So yeah. All right. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get our quiz on.